Hello, everyone. My name is Tanesha Toussaint, and I am part of the Golf Scholar program. And this is our podcast, Golf at Night. And our episode is going to be focused on hurricanes. Today, we are here with Candace, Campos. How are you today?
Good. How are you? Thanks for having me.
Of course. So Candace, she is the News 6 chief meteorologist, and she had done weather coverage starting in Miami, Oregon, and also Orlando, Florida. So, yeah.
I've been from coast to coast.
Coast to coast. Sure. You've been everywhere. So my first question for you is, before this podcast, I have done some research about you.
Uh-oh.
I see.
What have you found out about me?
I see your passion for meteorologist started at a very young age. Can you share what sparked your interest and what inspired you to pursue that career?
Yeah, I think I was the only kindergartner who knew how to spell the word meteorologist because back in 1992, Hurricane Andrew was a Category 5 hurricane. It was coming in out of the Atlantic. It was a hurricane that Miami, South Florida hadn't seen in a long, long time, to the point that I was teeny. I didn't know what was coming. But then all of a sudden, my parents started kind of panicking and rushing around and trying to get last minute stuff because we hadn't had a hurricane in their adult life for so long that everyone always assumed it was going to turn. It was not going to be a problem and all that stuff. And then all of a sudden, Andrew became our problem, right? So it was a Category 5 hurricane. It sliced through South Florida. Our home that we were kind of taking shelter in, the roof came right off. Building codes back in the day were completely different. And we had to ride out a Category 5 hurricane in a small half bath. My dad was standing in the tub part of the bathroom, holding onto that little tiny window that bathrooms have. And then my mom was on the floor with her feet against the bathtub and her back against the door, holding the door. And I was just sitting there on top of the toilet lid with a pillow over my head, just waiting for the storm to go through. And, as a 4 or 5-year-old, your parents know everything, right? They know all the answers. But in this case, they didn't know the answer. And they turned to this guy on the radio. And he was a meteorologist. At that moment, I didn't know who he was. But all I knew is my parents, my idols, they were the ones who showed, the calm in the storm. And he was the one that walked us through the whole process. And this is what you're hearing. And, the winds might be calming down now, but you're actually in the eye of a hurricane. And this is not the time to go out. And he just walked us through it. But he'd walked it through so calmly that I could see the peace that my parents had. And then after the hurricane, my entire life was upside down because I had no home. I had no house. Thankfully, we were all okay. And then I wanted to know who was that guy on the radio and why did he have all the answers? And then that's when I started to learn more about meteorologists. And then I got suckered and sucked right into it. And here I am, 35 years later. So kind of crazy.
Yeah, that's amazing.
Yeah.
I know for me, my first time ever experienced hurricane, especially as a Haitian, was actually, I think it was Hurricane Ian, and I saw all the damages, and I was like, wow.
That was an intense storm. Yeah.
Yeah, I was like, oh, okay.
Yeah. You know what? And hurricanes are beautiful features in the ocean, and I like them to stay on the ocean. People always have this thought that meteorologists like storms. We do. We don't like to talk about them hitting places like our home and things, but they are such an amazing feature that this planet has to offer. But what's interesting about it is that at least hurricanes, unlike earthquakes and even tornadoes to a point, a hurricane's coming days in advance. So there's ways of preparing. And that's the one kind of calming thing I know about hurricanes. At least that they're coming. They're a big beast, but they're obvious when they come.
My second question for you is, as the chief meteorologist for News 6, what is your day-to-day routine typically look like, especially during hurricane season?
Well, I do the morning. So some chiefs work at night, some chiefs work in the morning. So I'm a morning one. I get up around 2 on a typical day. And then when it's hurricane time, and really in the middle of it, coverage-wise, where we're under tropical storm warnings or hurricane warnings or watches, that's when things become a little more ramped up. But typically, I wake up around 2 a.m. I'm in at work by 3. I've got to produce my graphics and do the forecasting and figuring out, what models have been behaving and doing what they need to be doing and kind of put together my forecast. And then when people turn on the TV at 5 a.m., we are bright-eyed and bushy-tailed with all the information they need, so that way they can get it, grab it, and go, right? But when a hurricane comes, you have to kind of play a little bit more of a planner for TV, as well as a forecaster, a little bit of a therapist at times, right? Because sometimes you see this storm and you're like, oh my gosh, this thing looks crazy and this strong. And what is it going to be like when and you have to just take a moment. I need you everyone to take a deep breath. We have X amount of hours before we're going to start feeling impacts. So this is what we need to do. So I go from therapist to planner, saying, okay, from this time to this time, we need to make sure that we have all of our supplies. From this time to this time, we need to make sure that any last minute preparations that need to be done by this time. And we kind of work through the timeline depending on the storm. Sometimes storms hit during the day. Sometimes you have those more memorable ones that happen at night. And then at the TV station, sometimes during hurricanes, your bosses are like, it's too dangerous for you to go home and take a nap. So we have a big old sleepover at times, and we have our inflatable mattresses, and we pack our food and our snacks and things that are easy to eat that are kind of nutritious. So you're not, feeling like doo-doo at the end of the end of the coverage. Did I just say doo-doo on this podcast?
It's okay.
It's fine.
It's okay.
And, but anyway, so it's one of those things that you just have to roll with the punches, right? So during the winter, my job is a little easier sometimes because there's, it's sunny, it's 70 and beautiful. But then when it's time to get down and, focus on what needs to be focused on, hurricane season and stuff like that, you stay until as long as the community needs you. So there's been times where the lead up is really busy. During the storm, it's busy. And then the storm goes by and everyone's okay. There's not a lot of damage. Everything's fine. And we all can kind of go home, and it becomes more of a news story rather than a weather story. But then sometimes like a Hurricane Ian, here at UCF, that a lot of neighborhoods around here in, more of like the Orange County area saw crazy flooding that we didn't truly know the scope of it until the sun came up, right? And that's when you stay on. So even when the storm has passed, we still got to talk about it and how much rain fell and how much longer is it going to take for the water to recede. And so every storm is different. It's different coverage-wise. It's different intensity-wise. Some bring more rain, some bring more wind. So it's always kind of a luck of the draw. Each storm, it's like a person, right? Everybody has their strengths and weaknesses. So do hurricanes.
So you kind of cover it a little bit. So living and working in Florida, hurricane is one of like the major part of your job. Mm-hmm. How does your team like prepare in advance for major storms or like other natural storm before like informing the audience?
Yeah, it's kind of that way of just, like I said, like every storm is different. So when we know a storm's coming through or we don't know, right? It's the cone, right? And you see, okay, day 5, Florida's in it. Okay, that's when we start going, all right, so these are the things we need to start putting into our minds. That's when we'll start sending out reporters to different places that tend to be more of the hot spots where we want people to really start kind of focusing on sandbag locations, hardware stores, grocery stores, evacuation routes. So is a hurricane coming in from the Atlantic? Is it coming in from the Gulf? Is it coming in from the South? Those all play a role in how intense our weather could get, right? So you have a very strong storm coming in from the Atlantic. Our viewers include Volusia, Flagler, Brevard County, right? So that's our coastal zones where we don't cover Tampa and all the other counties all the way down, Southwest Florida. So it ranges in how big or small our coverage gets. If it's a weak tropical storm, albeit a tropical storm still comes with a whole lot of its own issues, but maybe coverage isn't as ramped up because it's going to just skirt the west coast of Florida versus the east coast, right? So it all depends on ramping up coverage depending on what the impacts look to be, right? And you start learning more about the storm as you watch it for days before it even gets close. So, we really focus on making sure that people are prepared for what they need to be. So if you live along the coast, right, and there's a storm in the Atlantic, what are the evacuation routes? That is also when the governor and emergency managers and mayors and sheriffs and things like that. They start coming to these press conferences and they start talking specifically to their county. So it's really trying to make sure that you have this overall umbrella understanding of what the storm can be, but also focusing your attention on each county because each county has its own different, impacts. So a storm on the Atlantic might have less of an impact for Marion County versus Volusia County, right? But still, people in low-lying areas in Marion County, if this is going to be a slow, wet-moving storm, areas low-lying might need to evacuate because of the flooding potential. So it's one of these things that you have to kind of take each storm and try to figure out what impact each county has. And here in Central Florida, the Orlando viewing area covers 9 counties. So that's a lot of counties to cover and such a overall large span that you need to make sure that if, 1 or 2 counties could have a really big impact, we're still going to go on because that county matters, right? It doesn't have to be the majority. It has to be what's important to the community.
You've been a meteorologist for a very long time.
Yeah, hot minute. Yeah.
So my next question is, how many hurricanes have you covered throughout your career as a meteorologist, and which one you would say was the most challenging to report and why?
I don't know. Well, when I lived in Oregon, I didn't have any hurricanes to cover, so that was the nice part about it. But then I had snow. I wouldn't recommend. I'm a Florida girl through and through. So let me think. Because when I lived down in South Florida, I was a weather producer while I was still going to school at FIU. We went through even a tropical storm. We had Tropical Storm Faye. I can't remember what year it was. I'm not good with dates, but it zigzagged across the state for like 5 days, created huge flooding issues from like the Florida Keys all the way up through Jacksonville. It was just one of these storms where you're like, oh my gosh, go away. It was just a tropical storm. And that's one hard thing to also break out of people's minds, especially Floridians who've been here and have done it. And, oh, I've been through a hurricane before. Nothing happened. Well, did you go through a hurricane that had this much water, that it came from this direction, that had this much wind speed? Every storm is different, right? So sometimes people just kind of shake off tropical storms because, right, it's just a tropical storm. Do we have school? Do we have work? That's all people want to know. I think the most challenging one, I don't know how many hurricanes, to be honest, because we've had so many different tropical storms. But I would say at least 10 storms that I've helped kind of forecast, whether it's down in Miami or up here in Orlando. I think the most challenging one was Ian. Ian was a tricky one because it hit at night, which we did some data a couple years ago. One of my colleagues, meteorologist Jonathan Kegas, and I kind of looked through all the numbers because anytime a storm hits at night, everyone goes, oh, why do hurricanes always hit at night? And we kind of felt that way too. So we're like, does it? Or is it just in our minds, right? Are those just the memorable ones? Because everything's a little scarier at night, right? And no, it's not true. They don't always hit at night. It's just, it becomes a little more memorable because someone has to stay up at night. And, if a storm hit in the middle of the afternoon, you're like, okay, well, you look outside the window, you see the trees blowing, daylight. It doesn't feel as ominous. The moment you the sun starts going down, the winds are picking up, you have no idea what's going on outside. That sticks with you, right? And Hurricane Ian was one of those where it was kind of through the night and we weren't getting a lot of reports of anything. And I remember looking at our team because our entire team was there at that point in the overnight. And, we're still on 24 or 36-hour coverage. And we're looking at him, and we were looking at each other like, this is not it. The storm's not done, right? The winds are weakening. We had some impressive wind gusts and things like that. But then we started getting all these little tiny flash flood warnings. These not flash flood emergencies. We won't get those a lot here because our terrain is not mountainous, unfortunately, like in Texas and things like that. But we started getting a lot more flash flood warnings. And they started coming fast, but they were small. And they were short-lived. And so we kind of kept tabs on that. And that's when we talked to our manager, our news director at the time, and we said, listen, we'd really like, once the conditions are okay, we really want to make sure that we get a chopper up and start looking because the water of this system was a lot, but we're not hearing a lot about it, right? So it was like this weird, silence that we didn't really like. And lo and behold, chopper went up. And I remember we were still on coverage, right? Because now it was more like recovery and where did the tree fall down? Who's home? You're talking to emergency managers. You have your reporters out that now the weather's getting better. You now start sending out the crews and finding out what the stories are and what things look like. Our eyes and ears on the ground, right? And the chopper went up. My news director went in and she's like, we're not getting off air. The amount of flooding that we are seeing from this chopper is unbelievable. And that's when coverage is kept on for days, even after, because there was people trapped in their homes. You had fire rescue on airboats saving people, first responders, neighborhoods pulling elderly out of living facilities and things like that. And it was just unbelievable that it was one of those storms where you're just like, you don't realize it until the sun comes up. And I think that's that overnight spookiness of storms that sometimes stick with people.
Wow, that's...
Yeah.
For me, as a Floridian, I didn't even know like a lot of hurricanes happen at nighttime.
Right.
And like you said, you did see a lot of damage and floodage. Like how many like floodage and damage did you guys think like happened? Like what was like the damage cost of it?
I don't know exactly what the damage cost of it was, but I just remember that areas that never flooded were flooding, right? Areas in and around UCF, the Rouse Road area, but then it stretched all the way up the St. John's, right? So the St. John's is this river that travels most counties here in Central Florida, and it's a really chill river, right? It doesn't flow very fast. It actually flows opposite. It actually flows from south to north, where most rivers flow from north to south. But to crawl, I can't remember exactly the speed, but it's just this slow river. It's not a rushing river, and it just rises and then goes and then starts finding the easy ways out. And unfortunately, those easy way outs were in so many homes where, they were close to the river. They weren't nearly as close to the river as they thought, or the river started backing up into retention ponds miles away where people were like, I don't even have flood insurance. I'm up on a hill. Well, you have a retention pond nearby and water's got to flow somewhere. And that's where you started to see it, the places that weren't the obvious. We have neighborhoods in and around like Astor, further north than here at UCF, and they flood pretty often. And people there live there. They know that they live and die by the St. John's, and it rises and it falls, and they're just used to it. We're used to them flooding, right? But neighborhoods and community apartments and things like that where people had to be rescued, it's just, that is where it kind of, but it stretched from Seminole County, Orange County, Volusia County, Brevard, Osceola. I mean, almost every county, minus maybe like Lake Marion and Sumter, which were a little further inland. But everywhere under that right side of that hurricane it was the flooding. It was the flooding that, and water damages, and people always think, oh, hurricanes or tornadoes, you get most deaths come from the wind, right? Because the wind that's the cool stuff, right? That's what you see in movies, and people are being blown away or sucked up by tornadoes, and people die more by water in hurricanes. And that's one of those things that people need to remember, that just because the wind isn't going to kill you, sometimes the water does.
I do agree with you. I remember that Ian caused so many damage in Orlando. And I also noticed that it was mostly like the apartments and the houses that were closer to like lakes. I know a lot of UCF students, they lost their apartment, their off-campus student housing.
And everything inside.
Yes.
Right.
Because one of the apartment, Arden Villa, I was actually going to live there until I saw the damage.
Oh, I remember Arden Villa.
I was like, oh, and then there was another one. I forgot the place. I think it was called the Palace. It was so damaged, they just shut down the whole apartment.
Yeah. Because water is one of those things that you don't, a fire, you can smell it. Water, you don't know you're having a water issue until it's molded and you're sick and, or things are starting to mold and things like that. So it's one of those things that water is a sneaky part of a hurricane that people sometimes don't think about.
What is like the unique challenges that you face as a meteorologist when hurricanes hit after dark? And especially when it comes to like informing and protecting the public.
Oh yeah, no, hurricane development at night happens. People think, oh, the sun heats up the ocean fuels the hurricane, and that's how it works. Yes, that's a simple 1, 2, 3 step of ingredients for a hurricane, right? What happens at night is it's called infrared radiation, right? So throughout the day, the earth sits there sunbathing, right? And it soaks up all that sunshine and it soaks it up into the ocean. It soaks it up into the ground that we walk in. And then at night, the roles reverse. Now the earth has to release that heat. It has to balance out its temperature, right? It's a living creature, if you think about the earth that way, right? It needs to regulate it so all that heat starts to escape, right? And that's how you get fog and other different things that happen at night where you don't happen during the day. So same thing happens over the Gulf as well, right? The earth releases it. The ocean still is warm, right? And the air around the ocean is also warm. So sometimes you get rapid intensification happening at night, right? Storms don't look at the clock and think, oh, it's time for bed, so I'm going to just chill here for a little bit, and then when I wake up again, I'm going to start, getting rowdy again. That's not how storms work, right? So even at night, storms also can intensify. The other problem is that you don't have as many eyes on a hurricane. So when a hurricane is over land, we have radar, we have things on the ground that can scan the skies. When it's out in the middle of the ocean, got no radar. So you have to rely on certain tools. You have to rely on the National Hurricane Center to send out hurricane hunters. NOAA sends out their hurricane hunters, so they sometimes fly at night. But also satellites. They're the only eyes in the sky over the ocean unless you send something into it, right? So the problem is visible satellite. All those satellites tend to be a little more difficult, and we don't have the sun to help shine it. So we rely a lot on microwave radiation to kind of see the storm at night and just kind of babysit it and make sure that it's not doing something different and kind of crazy. But where you get really tricky development at night is in the Gulf, because the Gulf is huge, but it's also really small. It's not the Atlantic. It's much smaller. So when you have a storm and an intense storm, you know that someone's going to get hit, right? It's in a circle. At one point, there's not an easy exit that it doesn't impact somebody. Maybe southeast, there's a couple little straits, the Florida Keys, but they'll still get hit. You have Cuba, well, they'll still get hit. Yucatan, right? There's no way for that storm to exit. So if you have a storm in the middle of the Gulf, all eyes are on it, right? But the problem is the Gulf is also much shallower. It's also surrounded by hot land. So naturally, the water at the Gulf is like a bathtub. So just a pure 80-degree ocean temperature is what a hurricane needs just to start developing, just to start getting its act together. But the moment you start getting into the mid-80s, upper 80s, which you don't normally see in the middle of the Atlantic because the Atlantic is so deep, but you have a shallow Gulf surrounded by hot, just think about it. It's like when you walk right into like the beach, the first couple steps you take, the water's not that cold because it's been sitting on the warm beach, right? That's the same thing about the Gulf. So you have some of these rapid intensifications happening because the earth is releasing heat. It's happening at night. You have to make sure you really watch it closely. And the Gulf is just already so hot that any extra little heat can easily rapidly intensify a storm, which tends to happen in the Gulf more often than not. Another issue with things happening overnight is people let the guards down, right? So all of a sudden they say, okay, well, the storm was supposed to hit A, and then they wake up in the morning and they still think it's the same forecast track. Well, guess what? Sometimes a hurricane doesn't roll from point A to point B with a straight line. It wobbles, it moves. Sometimes we have this thing called eye wall replacement, where it almost spins so fast, you're like a top, and all of a sudden it's spinning so fast that it starts to wobble. Well, that happens in a storm too, right? The physics are still the same. It's still the same planet, right? It's just a really big top. So sometimes you have these hurricanes that spin, their eye, the big center, that nice clear eye, starts to kind of fall apart. It's called eye wall replacement. But what ends up happening, it weakens. And then once it opens up again, it's even stronger than it was with the original eye. So all these little tiny changes happen sometimes at night, sometimes during the day. And what happens is people see the forecast cone. They say, "Oh, that's a Broward County concern. That's not me." And all of a sudden, you turn your attention away and you go back. You're like, "What? Why are we now under hurricane warning? I thought it was." Well, guess what? That eye wall wobbled, and now the forecast shifted. wasn't that the models were off. It was just the models were taking it from where they thought the storm was. And then overnight, the center shifted a little further north. Well, guess what? That track's also going to shift further north. So it's one of those things where I love technology and I love how social media has made people more aware and feeling more informed. Great. But one of my biggest takeaways nowadays, and especially with younger generations, where how many of us have time to sit down and watch the news constantly? I get it. It's the way of, and that's why the news business is trying to find different ways. Also, going online and being more social and doing other things to help send that information out. But sometimes a reel that you watched 12 hours ago is already way dated because of something that changed, right? So sometimes you have to make a conscious effort as a Floridian to stay informed. The information isn't just going to come to you. It's one of these things. These algorithms sometimes don't show you what's happening right now. They might show you what's just trending well. And my forecast reel that I showed 12 hours ago has crazy views, right? Comments, interaction. So it's going to pop up on your Instagram, right? But what's the problem? 12 hours ago, that forecast was 12 hours ago. Has it changed? Right? So those are the things that we all have to kind of take control of. I'm going to be an informed individual, right? Because at the end of the day, it's your life, it's your family, it's your property. You have to be aware of what's going on. So sometimes you go to bed at night, you kind of shut the phone off and just assume that that's the forecast and that's it. And that's sometimes not the way. Ideally, I would love a forecast 5 days out to be exactly what it is 5 days later. But it's a science. We're still, figuring it out, right?
You guys are still developing it, and also it's going to take time. You
Right.
never know in the future.
Right.
We're going to get like 5 minutes of like figuring out,
Yeah, it'd be nice. It'd be nice to know, like, 10 days from now, it's exactly going to be like this. It's going to rain exactly here, but we're not there yet. I can't wait to the day that we can do that, but right now it's not there. And, and also storms at night. You remember I told you sometimes on TV you have to play therapist, planner, forecaster, all of it in between. Sometimes it's like you need to stay awake. Somebody needs to stay awake, having different ways of being notified. Yes, the NOAA radio is so it's like a dinosaur, right? It makes an ugly noise, wakes up everybody. Well, guess what? That's what it's supposed to do, right? So sometimes when storms hit at night, one of the best things I would say is if you're with a group, whether you're with your family or you're a group of friends or fellow students or colleagues or whatever, whoever you're staying with during a storm, just have everyone have a shift, right? So from this time to this time, I'm going to stay up and I'm going to watch the news and keep an eye on what's going on. If there's a tornado warning, if there's a flash flood warning, I know that it's my job to be like, hey, everybody, got to wake up. We got to go into our safe room. Or, hey, we need to start evacuating. We need to move to higher ground or whatever the case may be. So just because you're going to bed doesn't mean the world stops. Weather doesn't stop at night.
That's actually a very good tip. I would give that to my parents.
Yeah, it's good.
My other question, it kind of relates what you said about the Gulf Coast and the Atlantic Ocean hurricane. Which one gets the most hurricane that affect Florida? The Gulf Coast or the Atlantic Ocean?
I think over the years, it's pretty dead even, right? So you have some that cross over the Atlantic and then they go into the Gulf and then they make a loop-de-doop and then slam into the Big Bend as a hurricane. So that's kind of an Atlantic and a Gulf. Recently, the Gulf's been getting all the action. You've had Helene, you've had Milton, you had Irma. Irma came up the spine, so did Ian. All these have been very Gulf. But what you have to think about the Earth is everything kind of cycles through, right? So you have years where Florida, it's like another hurricane. We had 2004 where we had like 3 or 4 storms back to back in Central Florida, right? And then you'll have nothing for 20 years. And everyone's like, oh, it's not going to come here. It never comes here anymore. And then all of a sudden, we saw what happened last 2-3 years. And it's like, okay, enough. We get it. Florida is the hot spot for hurricanes. Move on to another state. So it really does kind of fluctuate depending on the era right? Whether it's a couple years, whether it's a year. But Gulf is really having its moment, unfortunately, right now. But that's not to say that after recording this, all of a sudden the Atlantic starts waking up and starts, intimidating the east coast of Florida, where we haven't had a lot of east coast action. But we also had a, Dorian. Dorian was this Category 5 hurricane that looked like it was going to come and slam through South Florida. It pumped its brake over the Bahamas and didn't move for days. And then it just rode up the East Coast. So it's like, how many storms? There's more storms in the Atlantic because it's just a bigger area for storms to develop in. And you get some really crazy storms out in the Atlantic, but if they don't hit anybody, no one remembers them, right? So you had, and I love it. I love seeing these storms turn into these monster beasts that I'm like, this is just a fish storm. And they're like, I like how you say that. I'm like, yeah, because I enjoy watching those because we can analyze them. We can pull data from it. We can see those textbook things that need to happen in a hurricane without having all the extra stress of warning people about it, right? So being a meteorologist, it's kind of it's a weird balance because you are a scientist, but you're not a scientist, tucked in a lab, not having to explain it to anybody. You're just focused on, putting chemicals into a beaker and that's your focus and that's it. Well, there's, scientific, more science-based meteorologists, but when you're more in the communication business, it's also kind of a balance of knowing the science, but also knowing how to talk about the science too.
Your guys are basically like a scientist, a communication journalist, and media, both at the same time.
All at the same time, right? Because we have all this information, and scientists from the National Hurricane Center and forecasters at NOAA and all these other entities who are doing a fabulous job getting this data and making the data even better and forecast even more precise. That's great. But if we don't have the ability to communicate it to the people that this hurricane's going to be impacting, then our science and our job isn't doing what it needs to do, right? Like the science and the communication aspect of it needs to go hand in hand. If not, what are we doing?
My other question I wanted to ask, as you guys know, a lot of people don't watch the news on TV no more.
No, you don't say.
So what other communication,
like routes to take?
Like
what kind of
social media, TikTok, Instagram?
Yes.
Do you guys also use that as well?
Yes, all of it. All of it. Be uber duper informed about the weather. That's always my thing. But you know what? Sometimes watching the news, it's not as prehistoric as you once thought it was. It's not a just this old guy just reading from a prompter now. Now it's, we do a lot of research to try to find out what viewers want. Are we going to hit exactly what your algorithm and your wants and desires of content will be? No, we still have to broadcast to the masses. So especially during the summer, I challenge, the younger generation, the students who might be listening. It's just like, just do a 30-minute in the morning. You're getting dressed. You could still be watching all the stuff that you watch on your phone, but just take a second and just watch 30 minutes. That's all you need. Like, really, we don't draw things out anymore. Like these journalistic, long storytelling, and that we don't do that anymore. So we still give you all the information you kind of need within 30 minutes. But what's cool about it now is you don't need to sit on the couch and watch it, right? I don't have cable. I cut cable. All I have is Wi-Fi. Okay, well, guess what? We stream now on our website. So like for ours, it's clickorlando.com. Anytime we're on TV, we're streaming. So you can watch it on your phone. You can watch it on your tablet. You can watch it. You could put it on your smart TV. That is the best way to get the most up-to-date information, especially during a hurricane. Because while I'm on for 24 hours. I'm on every 2 minutes, let's say. And if I'm not on, I'm probably sleeping or eating or going to the bathroom because I'm human. But sometimes we don't have the ability to update everything. Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, all these things constantly. So when weather like an Ian is happening and there's warnings happening and there's flash floods and there's tornadoes and there's wind and there's rain and there's surge and there's all these things coming together, you watching a reel 3 hours later isn't going to help you, right? So yes, we are on social media. Yes, we're on TikTok, we are on Instagram, we're on Facebook, we're on, every place that we can be on. But we also have our ability to be on TV, but it doesn't have to be basic TV anymore. You could still stream on, you can download the News 6 app on your smart TV, which all of us, I feel like, have a smart TV now. Or you can do a Fire Stick or a Chromecast or whatever, and you can actually stream that. That is what I would say is your best bet when weather is actually a big deal and you need to stay updated. At the end of the day, and I fall into that. You're like, well, if it's news, it'll come to me or I'll hear about it, right? But when news is changing so fast, it's like a breaking news story too. If there is a danger happening in your community, there's somebody running around with a gun or, something like that, a reel an hour after it's happening is not going to protect you when you actually need to be protected, right? So it's one of those things where it's like the news business and the TV, the traditional TV, we know that the viewership is changing, and we're busting our butts. I'm going to tell you right now, we bust our butts now to showcase it in other ways because you cut cable. Okay, you're trying to save money. We get it. That doesn't mean you can't be informed. You still have many other ways of doing it. We are on YouTube. And the cool thing about some of these too, like the streaming and the YouTube, you can ask questions and we can answer them. You can't do that on normal TV, right? So one of our colleagues, Jonathan Kegas, he's a meteorologist, I'll be on TV and he'll be on YouTube at the same time. And I'll be doing it for our streaming, we'll do it for our TikTok. And I'm in charge of all those. And he's in charge of just constantly streaming information. So you can drop in there, listen to the information, wait until he tells you about, or you say, hey, I'm a UCF student. I'm really worried because I have no family here. What's the best plan I should do? Or when is it going to be the worst? Or when should I leave to my aunt's house further inland or whatever the case may be? He'll see those comments and he can actually answer them to you, right? So yes, the basic TV is there and we are there. And if you have the time to sit down and watch it, give it a try. It's not going to hurt, right? But there's also many other aspects that you can also be interactive and get more information than you can. So we're trying to make sure that everyone feels as informed. But I feel like also people need to do their part and make it a point to find the way to get that information.
That's good that you guys have learned different ways to inform the audience from the Gen Z kids to
everybody, to the boomers. Yeah, exactly. So at the end of the day, it's important that everyone gets their information at a timely manner, because things happen at night, things happen in the Gulf, things happen in the Atlantic. Things change at night. Things change during the day. So the good news is that there are scientists, there's meteorologists, there's people on TV, there's people online. There's also the radio. There's all different ways of being informed and finding what works best for you is kind of, my best 2 cents, my best tip.
So my last question is mostly focusing on college students. It's basically when hurricane are approaching and you and your team ensuring audience to receive time, clear, and accurate information.
Yeah.
How do you guys give out information, accurate information to college students who is new to Florida? If they're out of state, California, New York, and I never,
There's some parents who say, get your butt back home. I know a couple of families who have done that. Talk to your UCF heads, right? And everybody has ways of being informed, right? So UCF is also talking to the emergency managers of Orange County, right? So yes, staying with people is really important because it's, you're not alone, right? Making sure that you are in communication with your family, knowing if there is some place that you need to be evacuating to here at UCF. You're far enough inland that evacuations aren't a big issue, but making sure that family outside of here in Central Florida know where you are and know how to contact you. But also staying with people staying with friends if you can, or, other students, and just trying to make sure that you have people to kind of rely on as well. But, UCF students, you have a really good school that they really know how to take care of their students. So I bet there are many different ways that you can get information, even security issues, right? So outside of the school, there's many ways of being informed, like the news and on YouTube, and finding a reputable forecaster to make sure you're not just listening to some Joe Schmo, in his mother's basement, telling you what he thinks the weather's going to do. Finding those resources that will be able to guide you through it. And, that's what you should do before a storm comes, by the way. It's not like, oh, shoot, the storm comes like in 12 hours. I better figure out what to do. Do I need food? These are things that, you need to kind of just start taking it upon yourself to start preparing. You don't have a whole family with kids and grandparents and pets and, take care of yourself. Do the plans ahead of time. Figure out here at UCF, who is my contact when things go bad, and knowing who your resourceful, your good resource is when a storm comes. And it might not be here at UCF. It might be a meteorologist like me on News 6 every morning. But it's just one of those things. You have to start taking control of your preparations and knowing your resources and knowing the people and knowing where you need to be and doing it all before a storm even gets here.
Wow. Okay. Well, that was all that I have today.
Yeah, that's it.
Thank you so much for being a part of this podcast.
Thank you.
I really appreciate you.
It's awesome. Thank you so much for having me. And hopefully we can come back next year and be like, well, that was an easy hurricane season. We don't have anything to worry about.